The sun beat down over Dry Creek Valley, a forgotten town where dust whispered secrets and shadows held their breath. The McAllister estate sat at the edge of the lake, grand, proud, and cold as its master. Sterling McAllister, a self-made millionaire from railroad gold, ruled the property like a king, but no one ever called him kind. Every Sunday, the townsfolk would see his open-top carriage passing through town. Sterling in his black coat and bowler hat, silent as death. And beside him, a frail girl in a wheelchair, wrapped in a woolen shawl, her hair like burnt copper in the wind. Her name was Lydia, his only daughter. She never smiled. Never waved. But her eyes were the color of river stones, clear, sad, and deep like something forgotten. Lydia had been paralyzed since the age of 6. Rumors said it was a fall from a horse. Others whispered it wasn't an accident. But no one dared ask Sterling. No one ever dared ask anything. Inside the cold stone mansion, Lydia lived in silence. No friends, no laughter, no mother. Her mother had died giving birth to her. Just long corridors, a locked piano, and a father whose footsteps echoed louder than thunder. But Lydia wasn't alone. In the stable behind the orchard, there lived an old horse named Dusty, chestnut brown, with a streak of white down his nose like a lightning bolt. He was once Sterling's prized stallion, a racer-turned-ranch horse, now retired. No one cared for Dusty anymore. Except Lydia. Every morning, before the sun rose, the maid would wheel her down the gravel path to the barn. There, she would rest her trembling hand against Dusty's warm muzzle. He would breathe slow and deep, pressing his head into her chest, as if he remembered her before the chair, before the silence. They shared something unspeakable. Something that didn't need words. On the 3rd Sunday of June, the air was too still. Sterling ordered the carriage prepared earlier than usual. "We'll ride to the lake," he said flatly. "Just me and Lydia." The servants hesitated, exchanged glances, but obeyed. The lake was quiet that day. The sky bruised with heavy clouds, the wind stiff with warning. He wheeled Lydia to the edge of the dock and stood behind her, still as stone. "Do you know how much you cost me?" he said, voice as cold as steel. Lydia didn't speak. She stared out at the still water. "I gave up everything for you," he muttered. "And for what?" "A broken child who can't walk, can't talk, can't even look me in the eye." Lydia's fingers clenched on the arms of the chair. "I built an empire. I carved a town from dust. And you're the stain that never came out." Then it happened. Sterling looked around. No one. Just the lake. The trees. The wind. And then, he pushed. The wheelchair rolled off the dock with a creaking groan, wood on wood, then silence. A splash. The lake swallowed Lydia like she had never existed. Sterling stood there. Breathing hard. A tremble in his hand. He didn't see the old stallion standing just beyond the trees. He didn't hear the soft whinny. The hooves crunching earth. But Dusty saw everything. And that old horse didn't forget. Not that day. Not that man. Not what he had done. Dusty didn't move for a long time. He stood there behind the trees, his breath fogging in the cool summer air. The sounds of the splash still echoed in his ears. He could feel it in his hooves. Something unnatural had just occurred. Something wrong. And then, he ran. Not toward the mansion. Not toward the other horses. But straight to the lake. His old legs moved like fire, his chest heaving, hooves thundering over mud and root until he reached the edge of the dock, where the wheelchair was no longer. Nothing. Only ripples. Only silence. Dusty leaned forward, nostrils flaring, ears twitching. He sniffed the edge of the planks. Water. Oil. Wood. And something else, panic. The trees rustled behind him. Sterling McAllister reappeared, brushing off his coat, calm as a man who had just skipped a stone. He froze when he saw Dusty. "What the hell are you doing here?" he muttered. Dusty didn't move. Didn't flinch. Their eyes locked. The man. The horse. And something passed between them, an understanding. A silent, invisible line drawn across the world. The kind of line you never step back over. Sterling clenched his jaw. "You're just an old horse," he hissed. "You won't tell a soul." Then he turned and walked back to his carriage. But Dusty didn't leave. He stared at the lake for hours. He didn't eat. Didn't blink. He just stood there, waiting, praying, hoping for a sign. And just before the moon rose, he got one. A ripple. A faint splash. Then, floating to the surface, a hand. Pale. Small. Still alive. Dusty whinnied, long and loud. He galloped along the lake's edge, searching, pacing, until he saw her. Half conscious, tangled in the reeds near the shallow cove, Lydia. She had managed to wriggle out of her soaked dress, using only the movement of her arms to pull herself toward the reeds. She couldn't scream. Couldn't call for help. But she was alive. Barely. Dusty stomped the ground, circled wildly, then did something no one had seen him do in years. He reared. And then, he ran again. That night, under the deep blue sky of Dry Creek, Dusty charged down the hill into town, his coat slick with sweat, eyes wide with urgency. It was nearly midnight. Sheriff Amos, the only man still awake in the sheriff's office, sat reading by a lantern when he heard it. The sound of hooves, fast and heavy, approaching from the north. Then, through the window, he saw Dusty. The old stallion pounded to a stop right outside the door and neighed with fury. His chest heaved, and his hooves scraped the ground, pacing side to side like he was begging someone to follow. Sheriff Amos blinked. What in God's name? He stepped outside. Dusty took off again, then turned, whinnied, and waited. Amos hesitated only a second, then grabbed his rifle and followed. By the time they reached the lake, the moonlight had fallen just enough to reveal the shape in the reeds. The sheriff gasped. Lydia? She was barely breathing. Her lips were blue. Her fingers raw and bleeding from gripping wet vines. But her eyes fluttered open at the sound of hooves. And when she saw Dusty, she smiled. It was the first smile she had given in years. Amos wrapped her in his coat, lifted her from the water, and looked out across the lake, toward the mansion whose windows were still lit with golden fire. He narrowed his eyes. Something was wrong. Something terrible. And the only witness was the horse. The news spread through Dry Creek like wildfire the next morning. Lydia McAllister found alive in the lake. Sheriff claims a horse led him there. Sterling says it was a tragic accident. Sterling McAllister sat in his study, sipping whiskey before noon. His eyes were red, but his voice was steady when the sheriff arrived. She fell, he said without blinking. Poor thing must have rolled too close to the edge. I was fetching the blanket from the carriage. When I came back, she was gone. He placed a hand over his heart. I nearly dove in myself. Sheriff Amos stared at him for a long time. Except, he said quietly, she was found in the cove. That's over 200 feet from where your story starts. Sterling didn't flinch. She must have drifted. But Dusty. Dusty stood outside the window, just beyond the glass. Watching. In the following days, Lydia was placed under care at the town clinic. She couldn't speak much, not yet. Her voice had weakened from the cold and trauma. But every time someone entered the room, her fingers tapped something on the blanket. 3 soft knocks, then a pause, then one. It wasn't until Clara, a young nurse who used to sneak Lydia books, realized the pattern. It was Morse code. Lydia was spelling a name. Dusty. That same evening, Clara brought a small mirror and placed it in Lydia's hand. You want to tell us something, don't you? Lydia nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. Sheriff Amos returned to the lake 2 nights later with Dusty in tow. There was something eating at him, something unspoken that the stallion couldn't say, but had somehow shown. He walked the same path Sterling had. Stood at the same dock. Measured the distance. Too far. Too steep. He noticed something else. Tracks. Wheelchair tracks. And boot prints, behind them. But what chilled him most were the hoof prints. Old ones. Fresh ones. Standing still. Watching. Dusty had been there. And he hadn't looked away. Back at the estate, Sterling was growing more agitated. He stopped visiting the town. Claimed he was grieving. But he wasn't grieving. He was burning papers. Documents. Old photographs. Letters. Until one photograph fell from the fire and landed on the floor, face up. It was a picture of Lydia. Not in a wheelchair, but standing, holding the reins of a small colt. Her legs were crooked, but she was standing. Sheriff Amos found that photograph 2 nights later, after obtaining a quiet warrant and searching the estate. He found more than that. He found Lydia's medical records, altered. Reports that showed she had suffered a spinal injury not from a fall, but from being shaken violently. She hadn't been born broken. She had been made that way. Then came the twist no one expected. Clara brought in Lydia's old doll. It had fallen into the lake, but Dusty had carried it in his teeth to the stable. Inside the doll was something hard. Sheriff Amos cut it open. A silver locket. Inside the locket, 2 things. A picture of Lydia's mother. A note, handwritten, stained with age. It read, "If anything happens to me, don't trust Sterling. He blames Lydia for everything. He's not well." The letter was dated the night before her mother died. And just like that, the town understood. Lydia's mother didn't die from childbirth. She died trying to protect her daughter. And now the girl who couldn't walk had survived her father's wrath twice. Because of a horse. The trial was swift. Dry Creek's old courthouse hadn't seen this many people in years. Every bench was filled. Men removed their hats. Women held their hands to their chests. Sterling McAllister sat in the defendant's chair, silent and stone-faced. He denied everything. Claimed the documents were fake. Said the locket had been planted. Said Lydia had hallucinated. But then the sheriff brought in the photograph. Then the altered medical files. Then the letter from Lydia's mother. And finally, he pointed to the only living soul who had seen everything and never once wavered, Dusty. The courtroom fell still when the old stallion was led into the aisle. His coat was graying now, his legs stiff, but his eyes burned with something ancient. Something true. He walked past Sterling's bench and stopped. Then he did something no one expected. He turned and spat. Right at Sterling's polished boots. The judge banged his gavel. But the people? They didn't laugh. They stood. For Lydia. For her mother. And for the horse that never gave up. Sterling was sentenced to life in prison. No appeals. No mercy. His estate was seized and put into trust, half of it donated to the town's school and orphanage. The rest? Left to Lydia. She didn't want the mansion. She had them tear it down, brick by brick. In its place, she built McAllister Meadow, a quiet field with benches and apple trees, where children and horses could run free. And in the center of that meadow stood a statue. Not of her. But of Dusty. The plaque read. The one who saw everything, and stayed. Years passed. Lydia grew stronger. She regained partial use of her arms, and, miraculously, some feeling returned in her legs. She still used a wheelchair most days. But she didn't hide anymore. She spoke at schools. Read to children. Volunteered at the clinic. And every morning, she wheeled herself to the barn, where Dusty now spent his days in peace, bathed in golden light, chewing sweet hay, and watching the world go by. She would stroke his mane and whisper, "Thank you, old friend. You saved me, when no one else even looked." Dusty would nuzzle her gently, eyes soft and proud. He never asked for anything. Never needed to. He had done what no man dared. He had remembered. He had fought. And he had won. Life lesson. Sometimes, the loudest truths are spoken by those who cannot speak at all. Sometimes, justice comes not with a sword, but with a steady gaze, a loyal heart, and the courage to stand still when it matters most. In a world full of silence, be the one who sees everything and stays.